Wow. I'm just gonna start. His promise. Jalen made another loop around the perimeter of the room, romanticizing the brick walls. She brushed her fingertips along the rough surface, imagining she was encased in an enormous mansion. Instead of thinking of what awaited her, she sat, fantasizing about warmth and food and purpose. This was her little game, playing tricks on her mind to keep herself from going insane inside that empty little structure. There was only one way in or out of the room, and that was through a metal door that only had a handle on the outside. With each lap she made around the tiny room, she stopped momentarily at the door, her fingers shaking, feeling along the grooves and dents that she had made in it over the years. She couldn't let her mind sit on the thought of escaping for too long, though. Instead, she let out a little breath and fell down into a crouch against the wall opposite the door. So here we are again, Jalen muttered, hugging her knees to her chest. The silence grew to a deafening peak, and shortly after, she rubbed her hands together and launched back into this state of thought, rambling on to herself about whatever popped into her head. She hated realizing how alone she was, and when things got so silent that all her mind could do was circle back to how alone she was. Jalen bit at her cuticles, gripped by a certain anxiety that wouldn't go away until the door swung open. She began to tap her bare feet on the cement floor and mumbled the words to some old nursery rhymes into her kneecaps over and over and over. As she waited, her mind kept drifting back to the memory that she couldn't shake. It was only a few weeks before she was taken when she and her brother got onto an elevator. And for some reason on that day, it seemed they waited forever for those elevator doors to open. She was getting impatient, and of course, her brother was thinking hard about something. Out of nowhere, it seemed, he blurted, "If anything ever happened to you, I promise I'll save you." He was just a little squirt then, but he meant every word of it. She took in another sharp breath, regretting how she laughed at him, mocking, "Oh, come on. Who takes care of you now? The only one who will ever need saving is you." He looked a little hurt, but she didn't think much of it. Still, thinking back, she wished she would have taken him more seriously, or at least thanked him. She knew he probably would have never thought of that moment again. Yet he was probably the only other person on the face of the earth who would care to notice that she was gone. She sat there in thought for much longer than she realized, picking apart each moment and scrutinizing how she could have reacted. She was taken off guard when out of nowhere the metal door swung open, announcing another visit from her captor. Though she knew he could come at any time, she wasn't ready for it and began her prayer from earlier. "Please, save me." She murmured those words over and over again, clamping her eyes shut. She then cupped her palms over her ears with an attempt to drown out the footsteps that came closer and closer. An uncontrollable fear gripped at her, causing her to hyperventilate. Through the panic, she choked out another, "Please." She felt as though she was truly losing her mind now, and that man that stood in the room over her watched her carefully. In only an instant, Jalen was reduced to sobs that racked her whole body. She tried unsuccessfully to press herself further into the wall in hopes of disappearing. As the man reached down, Jalen's whole body tensed, ready for him to backhand her. Instead, he pried her hands away from her ears. She opened her eyes, crying out, begging him to let her be. She shook with a wild fear as tears spilled down her cheeks. "Jalen, you're safe now." The man tried several times to catch her attention, but only after he had said it multiple times did she hear the words shouted over the violent struggle. She went still, positive she was hallucinating. This was not the voice of her captor. She looked at the shadowed figure that was bent down in front of her. He let go of her arms and this time whispered, "It's me, Matthew." Jalen's ears rang, and she was sure she had misheard the man. "I'm getting you out of here." Matthew's eyes were beginning to fill with tears as he looked down at the state of his sister. She was a mere skeleton now, nothing like he remembered. Her hair was ratted into something like dreadlocks, and her face was smudged with dirt. But her eyes were still the same. She was stunned. She had dreamed of this moment for far too long, and now that it was here, she was second-guessing that it could really be true. Soon she turned her focus to the giant metal door hanging wide open behind him. Flurries of snow dusted in, her mouth slightly parted. You're safe. His words snapped her out of the daze, and she bolted for the open door, stumbling past him out into the real world. Little black dots danced around her vision. Matthew's heart dropped as he realized how unstable she was. Please. He ran out to where she stood, transfixed by the way that the snow spun down and melted on her skin. The world was so vivid. She reached out her fingertips to feel the snow as it came down in blankets, kissing her eyelashes and landing in her open mouth. Matthew ran to her and shrugged off his coat, scooping her up in it. But Jalen fought against him. He was not her brother. He had to be lying. She coughed as the cold cut through to her clothes. She pulled away from him. Let go of me! She used every last ounce of energy to push him away, but he wouldn't let her go. He brought his mouth to her ear and hummed a tune that she used to hum when he couldn't sleep. As she registered the Star Wars theme song, Jalen went still. She looked up into his eyes and saw that this really was Matthew. At that point, she was shivering so hard that her words didn't come out quite right. She mumbled something like, "Rethink the telephone." Matthew nodded, setting her down in his car, though he didn't quite understand what she meant. He hurried to buckle her in and reassured her that he had already called the police. The man that had abducted her would be behind bars. She was safe now. He continued to talk to her as he got in the other side and sped away, driving well over the speed limit. Come on, let's get you home. He struggled with a container of soup while trying to concentrate on the road, and when the lid came off, he spooned up a few bites for her. She was too weak to eat much more, and at that point was floating in and out of consciousness. Thank you. She closed her eyes, encased by Matthew's coat. He glanced over at her, relieved that for the first time in 8 years, he knew without a shadow of a doubt that his sister was safe. I don't break promises. The heater was on at full blast, and a fever raged through her body. Yet Jalen felt a peace that she couldn't describe. It didn't take long for her to fall asleep, passed out from exhaustion. Matthew sighed, smoothing down her hair. I've never given up on finding you. Now he could breathe, because for the first time in 8 years, he knew that she was safe, and he promised himself, right then, that he was going to keep it that way, that no matter what was going on, he was going to protect his big sister, who had always taken care of him so well throughout his childhood.
Isn't it amazing how different all the pieces are, and they had all those same words they had to use? I'm amazed tonight, the power of language. It's awesome. I next have for you Lydia Clarice.